This whole thing started with Cairo, a teen left all alone in her parents' huge house out in the Tennessee countryside. Her mom and dad were fancy lawyers, always jetting off to who knows where for work, leaving Cairo to fend for herself. But she didn't mind too much. Writing was her escape, her way to tune out the loneliness. Every morning, Cairo would lace up her favorite knee-high boots, some mini skirt, and strut through the woods to school like she owned the place. Soon as she hit the classroom, there was Mr. Jonathan Miller, Cairo's teacher and the only adult who really got her. Jonathan was this sad, middle-aged guy who'd once dreamed of being a famous author. Life hadn't quite worked out that way for him. Not that Cairo just saw him as a father figure, if you know what I mean. She kind of had a crush on old Jonathan, as wrong as that sounds. Anyway, Cairo usually beat the other students to class. One morning, Jonathan complimented her early arrival and told her to start reading up on the books for the semester. Imagine his surprise when Cairo smirked and said she'd already read through all 12 of them. The two chatted about literature like it was nobody's business until Cairo's friend Winnie, a familiar face in the class since she was repeating the grade, showed up. Winnie dragged Cairo off to the cafeteria, leaving Jonathan alone to snoop at the books stacked on Cairo's desk. Out of nowhere, Jonathan's buddy Boris showed up, snatched the book he was reading right out of his hands, and started teasingly reading some racy passage out loud. Jonathan tried shushing him before he got to the naughty parts, but Boris just kept on being a wiseacre. That's when Boris spotted one of Jonathan's own published books in the pile, one he never knew Cairo had. Jonathan was kind of floored she'd snagged a copy. When Jonathan got home later, his wife, Beatrice, was planted at her computer, all absorbed in her work as usual. He tried making small talk, but she was too wrapped up to really engage. So Jonathan tried to get Beatrice's attention soon after to share his excitement over one of his students taking an interest in his writing. While they were chatting, Beatrice's coworker Amy urgently rang her up. After the call, Jonathan got a little flirty with his wife and shared a couple drinks together. Things started heating up between them, about to get intimate. But then Amy's call interrupted them yet again, leaving Jonathan unfulfilled and on edge. The next day, Jonathan vented to Boris about his disappointing weekend, how Amy's interruptions killed the mood with Beatrice just when things were getting good. Boris busted his chops about the whole ordeal, then yapped about his own boring life for a while. As they shot the breeze, they noticed Cairo emerging from the woods nearby. Jonathan, still feeling tense from the day before, couldn't help but gawk a little as she sauntered up. But Cairo didn't pick up on the weird vibe at all, just giving them a friendly smile after taking off her headphones. Still feeling tense from before, Jonathan tried to play it cool by just making casual conversation with Cairo. Winnie totally didn't just accidentally drop her stuff in the locker room, you know? Boris saw right through that obvious lie. He sauntered over and was like, "What do you really need, huh?" He could tell she was just trying to get his attention. Catching on, Cairo told Winnie she was being pretty bold. Winnie tried giving Cairo some ideas for an essay, but Cairo thought they sounded boring. Then out of nowhere, Winnie suggested Cairo try flirting with teachers for writing material. Cairo looked at her confused, pointing out the big age gap seemed a little off. But Winnie, ever the flirt, reassured her it'd be totally fine. She said Jonathan seemed like a nice, gentle guy, making him a good prospect for Cairo's first time since she probably wouldn't feel too uncomfortable. That's why she doesn't want her sexuality to be initiated by some kid who can't last. Instead, she craves a mature bear, a man with a big caliber rifle to send her to the seventh heaven. Even though Cairo was hesitant at first, Winnie's playful prodding had her curious. Winnie kept on teasing, mentioning how Jonathan was always checking Cairo out, which left her blushing. As the days went on, Cairo couldn't stop thinking about all this. Her curiosity became overwhelming. She really wanted to experience it. In class, her eyes kept wandering over to Jonathan. One day, he quietly came up behind her and whispered for her to meet him in his office after the bell. In Jonathan's office, he was chatting with Boris and invited him over for dinner. Boris accepted. Cairo happened to catch Jonathan's dance moves, and after Boris left, he tried showing off some of those moves, joking around with her. They shared some laughs, then got to talking about Winnie. Jonathan said he approved of their close friendship and asked about Cairo's living situation. The teacher congratulated Cairo on her excellent recent writing. He was impressed by her ability to recite certain phrases and, recognizing her talent, challenged her to write a short story in the style of her favorite author, saying if she nailed it, she'd pass the semester. Cairo eagerly agreed. Then, out of the blue, she surprised him by revealing she'd read his published books. She recited a memorized line from one. Jonathan was delighted and confessed that book was his first published work, making it extra special. Miller admits he hasn't written anything new in a long time. He explains that ever since getting married, his life has just been pretty ordinary, nothing really inspiring him for a book. Cairo's like, well then, you just need to find that creative spark again. She challenges him to start writing once more. He invites her to meet up that weekend to discuss her short story idea some more. At the meetup spot, Jonathan sneaks up behind Cairo, surprising her. As they're chatting, he mentions how they've been working on honing their literary skills together for a while now. There's this poet named Elliot performing, and Cairo keeps stealing glances at Jonathan while he's listening so intently. Later, they critique Elliot's poetry, exchanging thoughts and opinions on it. Cairo offers Jonathan a cigarette as she's smoking, and he accepts. On a new school day, Cairo decides to switch up her look. She brings coffee for Boris and Miller, and they all seem way more confident now, just messing around together and sharing a cigarette. Cairo tells Winnie that even though the prof didn't say anything about her new look, she could totally tell he was into it. Later, Cairo tells Miller she wants to write her story like Henry Miller, that famous author who wrote a lot about love and sex. Miller's a bit worried, saying it might not be a good idea since it could cause trouble at school. But Cairo thinks it would just make her story way more interesting. After mulling it over, Miller decides to trust Cairo and lets her go ahead with the plan. Jonathan's phone buzzes. It's a text from his wife inviting him on a weekend getaway. Cairo approaches to discuss her short story, but he's too preoccupied thinking about his wife, so he just quickly approves Cairo's writing without really considering it. When they're alone, Winnie starts teasing Cairo, joking that she's totally trying to seduce their professor. She starts exaggeratedly mimicking Cairo's actions, cracking her friend up. Cairo's searching like crazy for her missing phone, while Jonathan keeps getting disrupted by persistent calls from Amy about their postponed weekend trip. Surprise, surprise, it's Cairo's voice when his phone rings. She accidentally put her phone in his bag. As they're talking, his wife is getting real frustrated about their getaway being delayed again. Jonathan volunteers to return Cairo's phone to her house and quickly agrees despite the incoming rain. As he's heading there, this crazy downpour starts. When he arrives, he spots Cairo walking outside in this sexy, seductive dress in the pouring rain. They lock eyes and share this intense, heated moment as she approaches him in the rain. Overwhelmed with passion, they embrace and share a deep, passionate kiss. After their intense moment, Jonathan can't get Cairo out of his mind. Out of the blue, Cairo sends Jonathan her midterm test, snapping him out of his Cairo-induced daze. Jonathan's wife, busy with other things, snaps at him, "Wake up and leave me alone already." So Jonathan heads off to a small house nearby. He prints out Cairo's finished work and dives into it. It's a super captivating story with mature themes, and he gets all excited, picturing Cairo in those scenes and fueling his desires. Unable to resist any longer, he turns to his handwife for release. The next day, Cairo shows up to class dressed in an enticing outfit, but Jonathan's whole attitude towards her has clearly shifted. He doesn't greet her warmly like before. Cairo senses something's off and asks if everything's okay. Jonathan expresses disappointment over the explicit content of her writing. He explains that while her storytelling is captivating, the graphic nature of her themes goes beyond what is acceptable for a school assignment. He feels uncomfortable grading it and worries about the message it sends to other students. Cairo tries explaining she didn't actually include any of that, but he's not having it. He flat out refuses to listen to her and decides to reject both her work and whatever they had going on. Jonathan even criticized her work, saying he regretted trusting her. When Cairo tried conveying her true feelings, his refusal to acknowledge them just pissed her off more. She snapped at him, calling his own works average and dull. Her frustration builds, and she dares him to fail her. Cairo gets super mad and starts insulting Jonathan hardcore, but he's adamant they're just teacher and student. She shoots back that he's just jealous he can't do what she did. After this tense blow-up, Cairo storms out and leaves her story in some admin's mailbox. Later, Miller's at home telling his wife about Cairo's story, which delved into a forbidden romantic entanglement between a teacher and student, including the student's first time. Meanwhile, Cairo's drowning her rejection from Miller with drinks alongside her friend Winnie. As the night goes on and they're feeling it, they jokingly decide to take some pics to tease Boris with, adding some fun to their girls' night. Then out of nowhere, Jonathan gets a call from the principal's office. Beatrice hands him the phone, and they're accusing him of having an inappropriate relationship with Cairo. Jonathan denies the whole thing to Beatrice, reassuring her it's not true. But Beatrice warns him about the potential consequences. He could lose his job and her if the allegations turn out to be real. The next day, Cairo's a no-show in class as she's meeting with the principal. Jonathan just carries on teaching. Winnie seems visibly shaken by Cairo's absence. After class, she approaches Jonathan, stressing how much Cairo means to her. But Jonathan stays stone cold, refusing to engage at all. As Cairo's plans start rolling out, the teacher gets summoned for a meeting with school management. Both Cairo and Prof. Miller get grilled with a ton of questions about their in-class interactions and if they had any close encounters outside school. Cairo's responses strongly imply there was a connection between them, leaving the prof concerned about his professional future and reputation. He's in a really tough spot because of what Cairo said. Finding Cairo's statements unchanged, the principal decides to suspend Jonathan. Boris approaches him after leaving the office, expressing his disappointment and advising Jonathan to be mindful of his limits to avoid escalating things further. After delivering that message, Boris dips to give him space. When Jonathan gets home, he reluctantly tells Beatrice about the suspension. She immediately asks if something happened, but he denies it at first, just admitting he gave Cairo special treatment. Beatrice is not buying it and keeps pushing until he confesses. Yes, he had feelings for Cairo. He hesitates when she asks directly. This leads to them just yelling hurtful things at each other. Beatrice is furious and storms out, saying she wants a divorce. Meanwhile, Winnie talks to Cairo about the potential consequences of her actions, warning it might cost Jonathan his job. But Cairo brushes it off. She sees it as her biggest accomplishment, and even included it in her college essay. Cairo explains to Winnie that Jonathan never respected her, so this was payback. Cairo's essay paints a vivid picture of the looming consequences from Jonathan's entanglement with her. As she wraps up the writing, that's where the movie ends.